All right. All right. Ano ai ke aloha ya kākou. Thank you for joining us today. Governor Green will provide an update on the state's progress in the recovery after the Maui wildfires and announce the Maui housing plan. Facilitated questions and answers will follow promptly after remarks conclude. And without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome Governor Josh Green.
Aloha, everybody. It's good to see you. Okay, so today I'm going to give an update on where we are with our ongoing recovery from the wildfire, which occurred 231 days ago. A lot of this update is going to also be on the budget, how much resource we have, and frankly, there's just a lot of positive news because people have been working so hard. So, like I said, day 231, people have been offering heroic recovery efforts. Next slide, please. So here you can see what a recovery plan in action kind of looks like. A lot of people comment, what are the details of the plan? Well, it's a living document. There's so much going on every single day. From our perspective, from the federal perspective, from the county perspective, but we wanted to share kind of where we've been and where we're going. Now, our progress so far. This is an overview slide. I'm going to dive into these details as we go forward, but on the day of the fire, we had, as you know, thousands of people displaced, and we lost 101 loved ones. In those first 13 days, we were able to move 7,796 people into shelter, into hotel rooms. As of today, we're now down to 3,109 individuals that are still in hotel rooms. That's a 60% decrease from our peak. We also, as you can see, are constructing a lot of housing. We've just begun. The first part of this process is 850 units. I'll break that down for you with a midsummer move-in for many of these units, some a little bit sooner. In addition to that, there are housing projects in the pipeline that have been on the docket for some time on Maui, but things do go slowly on most occasions when we try to build big developments. Finally, people have been talking about the costs. We've submitted some requests for monies because we have obligations that we have to acknowledge. But over the last 3 weeks, I've made several trips, including a trip to Washington, D.C. and a trip to Japan, and had innumerable meetings with FEMA. This will decrease our costs significantly. I'll go into that. Some of the costs that have decreased, for instance, are the cost for COFA migrants. For those who are from the Compact Free Association states, these individuals who had to go into hotels because they were also made homeless by the fire, displaced by the fire, that was up in the air for some time. Now they're covered. That saved us over $30 million. Also, we've done things like built a school in 95 days, which I think you guys saw us announce, and it launches on April 1st. The kids will be actually in class. So a lot of things are going on, and let's break it down. Next slide, please. Okay. So we have to get safer. So we contracted with national leadership on fire prevention, and so we have wildfire sensors that are now going into the field. They give us 24-hour alerts. They can detect wildfires from several miles away. We have 80 to start, and 20 will be in the region. This is a federal coordination, and it makes us a little bit more resilient. As we all know, we're going to be worried about fires when the fire season begins again. You'll see a lot of things passed in the legislature too, like a fire marshal. We're doing a lot of fire breaks. That's work with the Department of Transportation. So we're going to be hell-bent on making sure fires don't occur going forward, or certainly they don't threaten our people. We also did pass, we discussed for a while, and then kind of passed some documents together through the mayors to update our approach to alerts and the use of sirens, for example. So a lot of work goes on day in, day out. So that's one piece of the new safety measures. Now, a lot of people have asked what we're doing on housing. Housing is going to be a big part of the rest of this conversation. And I promised everyone that before April 1, we would tell you where we're going to be on short-term rentals. Would we or would we not need a moratorium? We will not need a short-term rental moratorium on Maui. We do need more housing constantly. We have to take in hand the illegal short-term rentals, but we won't have to do the moratorium because we have reached a minimum number of units to successfully house our impacted families. We have enough units across Maui, but we still have some shortage of units in West Maui. So I'm going to continue to ask for people, if they have short-term rentals or other capacity to rent to our people, to still go to helpingmaui.org/offer. You will get a very good deal. You'll get a lot of resources if you rent your short-term rental, but more regulation is coming, and it's going to come from the legislature. They will pass legislation, but also I've empowered our Attorney General to have a task force to go in and very seriously enforce the laws against illegal rentals. They cannot exist any longer. Illegal short-term rentals are consuming far too much of our housing inventory. So that's where we are, but we are now placing lots of individuals into housing. About 25 to 30 people a day move out of the hotels and into long-term housing, and that's going to really accelerate when we have our permanent housing up. Let's go to the next slide. Can we afford it? How is our state doing? Let's talk about that. The answer is yes. We have a stable financial outlook. Just a couple weeks ago, the Council on Revenues got together, and they determined that our projections are the same. The Council on Revenue said the 4% growth is maintained. That was because we've been steady on tourism. We have to do that because we need to pay for all of these other projects. We have to pay for housing. We have to pay for the new schools. We need to pay for all sorts of things. But that was very good. So that kept our budget stable. Have we had to tap into our rainy day fund? The answer is no. As you can see, it says EBR up there. The rainy day fund still has $1.5 billion. It is not being considered for use right now because we have enough resources, and I'll tell you exactly what those numbers are. We also fully preserved our essential services. We do not have to cut any jobs, any salaries. We're okay. Probably because we've stayed steady and people have continued to travel to our state. But Jamie and I did go to Japan to promote travel to Hawaii once again with the Japanese community. And it's going to take time because right now the yen is weaker than it has been in 34 years. So it's difficult for people to travel to Hawaii. However, our numbers have stayed solid. What we're focusing on is keeping all of our resources intact. And I'm going to talk about something that you haven't heard much about yet, and that is a $300 million pot of money that had been teed up possibly to go to an extra payment for the ERS, retirement funds. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's look at what our requests were. So a couple weeks ago, when we had to put down our request for emergency funds, we had to honor what was a potential cost item for ourselves. That was $297 million for temporary housing in our ongoing response, and up to $65 million for the One Ohana Fund. As of today, 21 people have signed up, and that's going to continue to ramp up, and we'll see how many people ultimately choose. It's completely optional to choose to participate in the One Ohana Fund. That's monies for those who lost a loved one. But we had to recognize the potential highest numbers. Now, since that time, and you saw there was concern, of course, about whether or not we have enough resources in the state to pay for our ongoing needs and top priorities, I went and secured first about $30 million of extra coverage because we now have COFA coverage, which is appropriate because these are individuals who often serve in the military, they're our workers, they live here. So that's been a long time coming. Also, we got clarification that condos will be eligible for payment by FEMA. That hasn't always been the case in other places, but in Hawaii, we made the clear case that there were no other options. So they're covering that. That's at least $43 million. A big one here, the debris removal. That's going to be over $1 billion for FEMA to do. We would normally, because we already got the federal government to agree to only make us pay 10%, we would normally have to pay that 10%, which would be $107 million. That is not going to happen in fiscal year 2024. I don't believe it will ever be a responsibility because I think they're going to finish in a window that will preclude any cost share. I think that the 6 months that we have with a probable extension should cover that totally. So $107 million will likely come back to us. And then in the course of our work, we have partners. We have the philanthropy community, Hawaii Community Foundation in this case. They've agreed to pay for $40 million of our Kala'iola housing development, which was 450 units. So that project is now $40 million less. If you add up these numbers, that's $220 million less I expect that we'll ultimately have to pay for. These are good numbers. This is good news. But we still have to have emergency appropriations because you can't be certain when some of these bills come when you have a disaster of this kind. Also, there are new projects that will come. For instance, I've asked the Lieutenant Governor to work on some additional housing. As we've put these 450 housing units into play, we're going to need a lot more. Our plan ultimately is for 2,000 housing units, which I'll tell you more about. So you can see there are some savings. Now, these are our financial plan numbers if you really want to dive into where we are today. If the legislature stopped today and we just had the resources that we have available to us, we would have no less than $681 million in balance going over to next year. And in all likelihood, we'd have $300 more million. I'll talk about that in a second. And then in fiscal year 2025, if things stopped today, we would have at least $350 million in carryover, which actually would likely be $650 million, because once again, my general inclination is to allow a lapse of the ERS extra payment, which would be $300 million. And let me be clear why. We've gone through an enormous disaster. We have to take care of our people. We've seen people in crisis. Depression has surged. People have struggled after the pandemic. I want those services in play, and I want us to be paying for programs that will help our local families. That's why I think it's better to invest in our people rather than an extra payment on the ERS. We'll talk about that in the coming days, but that's an important thing. So we have adequate funding for sure. In fact, it's absolutely adequate, which would include paying for other priorities, like the tax breaks for Alice families who are living on the edge and are housing insecure, or for the housing projects that you've seen, the homeless programs, which are really thriving under former Representative Mizuno, now our housing czar, and even our climate work. We want to continue to function, and we are functioning, but we are not in a place where we have to make cuts. So that's where we are right now. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about recovery. And this is an overview slide, then I'm going to dive into it. Again, when we talk about the plan, you're looking at it right now. And this is often broken out into much greater detail with the experts. But by way of overview, as you see, 101 lives lost, over 12,000 people were displaced, so almost closer to 13,000. What does that mean? Well, 3,971 properties were destroyed, and ultimately there's going to be very large recovery that has to go on, and probably settlements. The damages are estimated to be between $4 and $6 billion. Much will be paid by insurance. Some will be covered by lawsuits, you can imagine. This is a going forward challenge for all of us. What's most important to me is that the people recover. There were 561 homes in the burn zone that were owner occupied. These are families that have been there for a long time. We're going to help them quickly. Already 25% of all the lots have had their debris fully cleared. It's quite incredible. That means they're going to get permits sometime later this year to begin to rebuild back in Lahaina. That's going to be the Kuleana of Maui. The Maui mayor, Bisson, who's been fighting hard, working hard for everyone to help his people survive, he will be able to expedite permits to get people back into their old homes. A lot to share here. And then finally, there were thousands of businesses that were destroyed. Again, insurance will cover some of that. In some cases, there will probably be settlements. So we will prepare for that in the future. This is what it looks like when you talk about stages of recovery, but I'll break them out more for you, and we're happy to give you all of this in the form of handouts. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what was stage one? You've already kind of been aware of this for a long time. Stage one was the first basically 2 weeks where we had to get everyone into some form of civilized housing, and that was hotels. That was the 7,796 people. Food services, social services, just making sure people didn't become homeless. We quickly moved them faster than anyone in the history of American response. That was stage one. Now let's go to stage two. Next slide, please. Okay, I want you to see this kind of in a more broad way. Stage two is where we move people into longer-term housing, condominiums, in some cases houses that are owned by other individuals in Maui. We're in partnership at all times with FEMA. So they have a direct lease program, a rental program. We also emulated this with a Department of Human Services recovery program. So people who were not eligible for FEMA could go into those units. I think it's about 150 families, because it's very expensive in hotels and we want people to have a more normal life. And now we're building also. And you can see here, 2024, we're right through here, right? And now you can see what it looks like for 2025 and 2026. Some of this is going to change, but this is hardening as we go. You're going to see here a FEMA group site, Kilohana. That's in Le'ili'i. That's the area where they've already planned 169 houses. The infrastructure is going in now. Kala'iola, that's our housing project. That's 450 houses. Those houses are on their way. I was at the site the other day. It's a beautiful site. It's incredible. It looks down across the ocean. It's very close to where old Lahaina town was. We need these transitional houses because we want people to move definitely away from hotels, that last 40% of the individuals that are still waiting for transition. But we want a lot of people to have stable housing. We're going to build 2,000 units over time so that as we catch up with permanent housing on Maui, we're there. And then you can see another couple bars here. Kapalua. Kapalua is it's the golf course over where they have a resort. 50 houses are going in there courtesy of Mr. Yanai. He's one of the most prominent individuals in Japan. I've met with him several times, including last week. And we're entering into a partnership to help house a lot of people. They have more than, I believe, 1,000 housing units. These are modular houses, quite nice. Some of them are already on the ground in West Maui, in Kapalua, but they are going to be big help to us. Some of it may be donated, some of it will be through partnerships, but it's much more affordable. These housing units tend to cost about $80,000 for a house that's 2.5 to 3 bedrooms. And they provide a lot of transition for us. In addition to that, Hagai, the Hagai Institute, it's in Kihei, but it's got 175 units. Some people are going to probably choose not to live in West Maui for a time until all the housing is rebuilt. But I want you to know that that's also available to us. And then this bottom line, which we'll break out later, is the long-term kind of permanent housing solution. And that's what the people of Lahaina have to choose to do. So now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so basically we are kind of end of stage 2, beginning of stage 3 in the recovery. How do you describe this? Well, we talked about stage 1, right? It started with 40 hotels. We're now down to 11. It started with the expectation that everything would be reimbursable for 45 days. But then as time goes by, states start picking up a lot of the cost. We peaked, like I said earlier, at 7,796 individuals. We're now down to 3,109. I think that's down 60.2%. They're doing direct leasing. This is what I was talking about as far as having enough units. So the pressure we put on, which I think was appropriate, enabled FEMA to get well over 1,000 units. Also, we have these direct leases in place, and I told you about our program, Department of Human Services. It's 125 households have rental assistance from DHS. They're safe, secure, in a good housing situation. CNHA has been terrific. They've been doing the host housing program where they pay $500 per person to go and live in houses that are in West Maui. Again, all of this complements itself because we don't want people to be in hotels at high expense, and we want them to get back to their lives. Here's our current state. We're supporting people to, in every case, get back into a regular state of life through any means necessary, basically, because we believe in our families and supporting them. But we have to do some long-term building, and we have to have this transitional phase. So let's go to the next slide. This is what the construction of the temporary housing sites is going to look like. So I mentioned Kala'iola, and then also the FEMA site. So there you can see our first 450 units, and then 169 units as infrastructure goes in there. This is HHFDC land. A lot of it's going to be, over time, DHHL land. So we want everyone to know we're partnering. We're working together. This is not easy work. And I want to give special thanks to everyone who's working on this. Joe Campos has been really busting his butt to make this happen, along with his team. It's been extraordinary. I'd like to see the sign for busting one's butt again. Thank you. That makes me happy. Okay. So we'll go on to the next. Let's actually continue on this slide a little bit more. We've asked FEMA to build up to 1,000 houses for us, 1,000 units. They're at 169 now. They have plans for at least one additional site. And I had a conversation with the President's Homeland Security advisor today. And we we do this in steady fashion. We know it's difficult for FEMA to justify large builds because they're really supposed to be an emergency response entity, but we are going to have at least 2,000 houses, so we'll be working with them and with HUD over time to build many more houses. And frankly, we have to pick up the slack if they can't do certain things. But they're helping us with infrastructure also. Ultimately, we expect much of the costs to be borne by the federal government, but a lot of the work will have to be done by us. There I mentioned HUD. We will get community development block grants coming forward. This will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars range. It will be over $500 million, all but assured. But that usually comes significantly later, and that will be to build housing for the future. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so how do we do kind of permanent housing and sustain that? Well, that is always difficult, and the main difficulty is water on Maui. Now, for now, because these 4,000 some odd structures are gone, they're not consuming any water in Lahaina. So there is water available, but we have to be thoughtful. So we will take the guidance again from the community, from the Water Commission, from DLNR, from cultural leaders. But I can tell you this, our priority is to actually build permanent housing. And so some of the units are going to be built over time. It's over 5,000 permanent housing units. You can see the names of these places here right now. So they are many. Let's see, Kai'ula, Kukui'ai, which is in Lahaina actually, Haliopi'ikea, just several. And they're going to be apartment complexes. In some cases, they're single-family houses. But that's going to take 5 to 10 years to fully build out, which is why we don't want to neglect this middle period where we have transitional housing. Of course, a lot of people are going to rebuild their homes because they own the land. They're entitled to do that, but it's going to take time to get all the infrastructure back in place. So this is about healing. This is about rebuilding the community, but it's also about having a new chance, a new opportunity to do right by the people of Lahaina. And that means the Filipino community, the Hawaiian community, all the communities that have lived there and worked there. So one thing that we're going to do is we're going to restore the cultural corridor, which is Moku'ula. Mentioned that right there. That's described as Maui Sacred Island. Our restoration plan is to give that land back into trust to the people of Lahaina so that they can have the fish ponds again, so that they can restore the ahupua'a as we build some housing around that area. That's very important because we have to restore trust. And so that is a major attempt to actually do the right thing and to restore trust. So we're working with Keamoku and others from the Maui community. Archie and others have been weighing in on this. The mayor and I are already in full agreement that we do that because that's part of the process to heal the land. So you'll see that. You're going to see economic development growth right there for businesses that have been lost. And we're also having a Maui Economic Recovery Commission led by Chair Tokioka, by Jimmy. So all these things are in essentially stage 3 and then into the 4th and 5th. The long-term recovery is in the 4th and 5th stages. Next slide. Again, I wanted you to see just the big picture here, okay? So this was us launching property over in Kapalua. This was us talking with the small business administrator. Like I said, over 60% of people have moved out of hotels. We've negotiated up to $220 million in savings from that first projection, which was $363 million. So we're hopeful to get some of that money tamped down, but there's still going to be needs. And then you'll see our balances continue to improve because, as you know, some monies are going to get lapsed. Why do some monies get lapsed? Well, it has not been easy to work on all of the projects that we've had teed up for our administration when you've had an entire additional responsibility. Now, we're still working on everything, as you know, homelessness, healthcare scholarships, big housing plans. But some of the projects we would like to have done in 2024, they just take more time because we don't have infinite capacity. We will have good carryover balances. You saw that we already built a school, and now we're moving on 850 units. And then finally, we're going to really take on short-term rentals that are illegal. And I've asked our Attorney General to get serious about that, which she will. So that is where we are today. Next slide. Okay, I think this is just a picture of the firefighters when we announced the new technology. want to really give them credit. Only one firefighter retired after the fire. It's incredible, actually, over in Maui. And this was the site just a couple days ago. See, that's my bald spot right there. And this is the school. This is the replacement for King Kamehameha, the third school. So a lot of things are happening quite quickly. We appreciate people's understanding and patience. I want to say mahalo to all of our partners. I want to say mahalo to the legislature. The session is only 100 days long. This tragedy happened to occur just a couple months before it, and people were still reeling from a fire that swept through a town and took it out completely. Normally these projects take 4, 5, 6 years. We're 8 months in, and we're already making movements to build housing back. We've already built a school. We've already found ways to begin to settle with those who lost loved ones. That's probably 5 years ahead of schedule. So we're trying to accelerate that because I believe we have to take on our problems in our state, and we shouldn't wait. But the people of Maui have been very understanding, and I think that many more of them believe in our approach now that they're seeing results. It just takes some time. So why don't I pause there and open it up for questions. Is that right?
Great. Our first question, if we can have Cynthia with KITV.
So Governor Green, I talked with some people as far as housing, and I know that they were like the short-term rental people, they were kind of concerned, and you said that as far as short-term rentals, that you're not going to have that moratorium.
Right.
So how can you assure just people on Maui, and just people who do have like these vacation rentals, what you're going to be doing, what your stance will be regarding the housing? Because obviously they know it's needed, and they know that they've reached out to people, especially on West Maui, to give them that housing.
Yes. So how can I assure them? The question is, how can I assure people in West Maui who do own short-term rentals of what the rules will be going forward? Okay, so a couple things. Already there's been a change, which is that if people want to rent their properties to local families that were displaced, the county council, and I really commend them again for this, and the mayor have already cleared the deck of their property taxes. So they can have a property tax exemption. So that's a change already, which is a benefit. Going forward, though, there's 31,000 short-term rentals on Maui, and many of them are illegal. I can't assure those individuals at all that they're going to be able to continue to rent their places out as short-term rentals. What I would humbly ask them to do is go to that website, voluntarily rent for the next 2 years, probably through FEMA or through us. Let us handle these rentals, and then, frankly, transition out, sell your properties to local families. That's the best thing to do if you're not in compliance right now. If you are a fully in compliance short-term rental, you're fine. Pay your taxes. Frankly, still take us up on our offer to rent to local families at a pretty high rate. That rate was essentially the rate they were getting in the previous year. There is no threat now that I will do a moratorium or a ban on short-term rentals because people have stepped up. I will say this, though. The Lahaina Strong guys are right. There should be serious action taken against illegal short-term rentals, and there has to be a full assessment of several of those who were grandfathered in, because I think those grandfathered in short-term rental units should over time be transitioned back to the housing market. That's the right thing to do.
Just one follow-up. So what will the peak be as far as the...
How much? Because I know that when I've talked with people, they said, how can the average family afford $6,000-7,000 a month?
So the answer is average families who are displaced can't afford that, but that's why FEMA will cover it, or the state will cover it. When I mentioned earlier that like a one-bedroom, we would pay $5,000, two-bedroom, $7,000, and so on, the benefit there was it was much less than hotels, and you could have a more extended family be in that house. So we were getting a much better benefit, and people would have a kitchen and a yard and so on. So we will extend that likely into 2026. We have to have those final discussions with FEMA. The FEMA programs, they have the capability of giving us extensions, and they've continuously done that. Here's the challenge, though. People, in some cases, have tried to get out of their contracts or their leases with just regular renters so that they could take advantage of these high rates. That's not okay. That is not legal, and they should simply not do that. We only should be covering this because we have disaster relief monies. That's the only reason we can do it. What we're worried about is in about 2 years, when federal resources start to dwindle, that we will have a cliff. In other words, people will be in rentals, but they won't have anywhere else to go, and that the rental market will be far too high. That's why I'm pressing hard for 2,000 units total, and why I need the feds to help us, and why it's kind of all hands on deck. Me, our housing team, Lieutenant Governor's team, the legislature, even the federal guys, we're going to ask for additional appropriations if we can get them. What will likely happen is we'll ask for emergency appropriations over time as other states go through that process too. Like Maryland is going to need an emergency appropriation after having their disaster. Louisiana and the South went through hurricane season, and we still have housing that we have to pay for. We can do housing much less expensively than the federal guys can do, and we're mindful of that. We're trying to be frugal because I want to see a full recovery and resources in the out years.
Next question is from Audrey with Associated Press.
Thank you. Governor, you were saying that you don't need a short-term rental moratorium because there are enough long-term rentals in place, if I understand correctly. I'm wondering, how can you say that if there are still 3,000 people living in hotels?
So thank you for that. It's a very good question. Well, what has happened is it takes time for people to fill out their applications and move into those units. Those units are now available. But we're not kicking people out. We've actually set into place a policy where people get multiple options. A lot of people have been offered an apartment housing and have rejected it because it's too far away from West Maui, or it didn't suit their family circumstance. And we've tried to be incredibly understanding because we don't want to additionally disrupt people's lives. But the current policy is that people will have no less than 4 opportunities to choose, and then actually we allow them to appeal an additional 2 times, and still will work with people beyond that. So there are some circumstances where people have rejected the offer 3, 4, 5, even 6 times to go into housing, and that's a challenge. Not because I don't understand. I do understand how difficult it is to have to commute at all, but many of these units, they simply have to be occupied. And so we're trending towards full occupancy outside of the hotels by July 1st. That's when we believe everyone will be moved out. But we do have the units now. And additionally, we're going to have our transitional housing units in Le'i'ali'i, Hagai, and so on. So once that transitional housing comes online, honestly, people will have to go move into those if they haven't left the hotels yet, because it's only fair. I mean, we need the resources so that we can build the next school, so that we could build clinics, rebuild clinics, I should say, that were lost during the fire, so that honestly we can settle with families who lost a loved one or lost their business. These are going to require significant resources. So that will end, the phase of living in hotels. And I know every case is different. That's why I'm trying to be thoughtful here. Some people just haven't agreed to leave the hotels, even though there's been a lot of housing. And I don't judge because I know what they went through. But we do have to move on. And we have to move on to ultimately our permanent housing, because people are going to start renting, again, normally. That's going to be necessary.
Currently enough units, or by July 1st there will be enough units for everybody who is in a hotel right now?
There are enough units now, actually. And we, even having said all of that, we will maintain 1 or 2 hotels at a much more affordable rate for extreme circumstance. We also will encourage local hotels, if they want to house some of their employees, and if they have space, to do it, because it might be in their interest to have workforce there on site. But yes, we have over 1,300 contracts available to us, and we've now dropped under 1,300 households. So we, in a perfect world, could get everyone there. We also have been holding not just day-to-day sessions, but weekend sessions where we do massive matches. It's just difficult for some people. Some people were severely traumatized. And so, again, we're understanding We were particularly understanding over the holidays and when it was just 3 months in, 3.5 months in. But as we approach 7, 8 months, we know that everyone has to move out. Fortunately, we've been able to get the federal government to cover much of the cost, and that was the importance of adding approvals for COFA families. We also, at one point, had 820 households that were deemed non-FEMA eligible. We dropped that number all the way down first to 550, and I believe we're under 500 now because people continuously get approved through the process that we're going through. One more thing I didn't mention, I did enter into an agreement with the federal government to do a full study on housing. It'll be back to us sometime in late April, and that study will, I think, demonstrate the need to build the extra 1,000 houses from the federal side, or at least support us to build those extra houses, because I've explained it to them already. They just wanted the analytics on it, that when we lose 3,000 plus houses, it was like 3,300, it will cause a horrible ripple effect for everyone else if you don't have units. So we have to build that number of units back. They just wanted to see it in black and white. So they hired a consultant team out of Maryland to do that. And believe me, I'll be discussing this with the president and their team once we see the data, but it's evident to me already that we have to build those housing units, because I don't even want people to have to spend many years in rentals if they can avoid it. I'd like them to be in their own home again.
Comes from Bryce, KHON2.
Thank you. For the direct lease program that's secured around 1,300 units,
Yes.
Less than half of those are occupied. So are those being paid for? The ones that are unoccupied right now, is money still going into those even though no one's living in them?
Yeah, those are FEMA dollars, and in some cases they had to begin to execute contracts. I think that they have rolling agreements with these units, but in order to lock in units, yes, they have to pay for some of them. The goal is to fill them all and then to release the contracts if it's unnecessary, if ultimately we have everybody housed. One of the challenges was that not every unit is in West Maui, which we know. It is an incredibly complex problem. So some people are understanding, they go live elsewhere. In some cases, we will provide them with transportation. We have resources, for instance, through the TANF program or through some of the other federal assistance programs to get people a car. But it is a long and heavy lift. For us, though, we're trying to not waste anything whenever possible. So resources are kind of going, as we get units for our DHS program, we put people in. We have more latitude.
And then just a quick follow on the short-term rental. So we've reached the minimum number for displaced families. How do you reconcile that with still keeping the program open to people who want to join?
Well, if they want to join, they'll only get paid if we put someone in. So the way I reconcile that is some people are going to fall out of contract, other people will lose patience and leave. Right now, for those who are getting compensated into the program, they're happy to participate in it. It's kind of like you have to restock the shelves in some cases, because if you lose certain numbers of units, you don't want to be left in the lurch and then have someone stuck in a hotel room again for another month. So that's important. We are decreasing the costs in the hotels. We're going to decrease, for example, people won't need 3 meals any longer because now restaurants are open again and grocery stores are open again. But still, we're trying to be very thoughtful because people had their whole lives destroyed. The better thing for people to do is to move into long-term rentals, and then the moment we make a small home available, and most of these homes are going to be like 400 to 500 square feet, they're very nice. It's going to be a community for people to move into. I think a lot of people are going to want to keep that community actually for a long time. There are several different locations that are being considered in addition to the one I mentioned earlier. For example, Kaanapali 2020 is something that they're still working on, and I believe the feds will continue to consider that. There are several places in central Maui that have been considered, but once again, that's a good solution for Maui in general, but maybe not for the community that was displaced during the fire in West Maui. So there's a lot of work going on. As you know, the House appropriated over $1 billion for the next 2 to 3 years. A lot of that's for infrastructure and for housing in the future. This is a long-haul solution that we needed anyway, and so we're expediting housing on Maui, but we also have to expedite housing on Oahu and on Big Island because those guys are paying too much also for housing.
Our next question comes from Daryl with Hawaii News Now.
Thanks. It seems to me when I saw the last presentation to WAM, the timeline on the modular housing coming in was aiming at July 1 primarily. I see on your graphic now, it looks like you're looking at Q2 for the most part for those. What happened in the supply chain or in the educational process that made you slide that? And if you slide that, how can you say for sure you'll get people out of the hotels by July 1?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. So I can get people out of hotels by July 1 because they can go into the rental programs or the direct lease programs because we have enough units. But some units will actually be up and running, surprisingly, in June, July. And a lot of people, I think, would just rather go straight into a transitional house, which I think they could stay in for several years. That's an additional entire press conference probably when we figure out the best amount of time to cover people's costs entirely before they are recovered enough to pay for their own rent and so on. But as to slide and schedule, these are large orders, right? We're ordering essentially modular houses that we have partners here in the islands to put together, construct, honor their work, but we were ordering them from overseas. But in advance of this, I did work behind the scenes to also have additional options. For instance, like we were describing with Mr. Yanai. So he is out of Japan. He essentially owns or controls a big part of a housing company over there, and they are already in discussions with our local workers. And there's a lot of units there. That was a call that we got from the ambassador, actually, Rahm Emanuel. He contacted our team with his team and said there was a good option because we kind of cracked the door open over at the golf course at Kapalua. They asked to bring in 50 houses, and we said okay. And that's created a new opportunity. It may create an opportunity statewide for housing, but we have to build good housing, and we want to build permanent housing. So I want people to get a taste of that and see if it's for them.
Just to quickly follow up. So at this point, looking at all of this complexity and difficulty, and no one's going to have any doubts that this has been difficult. Do you have any regrets about not taking up FEMA's offer for the trailers? I know legislators are fixated on that. Do you have any regrets about not doing that, given the costs that you've now incurred for the hotels?
That's a good question. You know, in places where they've used trailers, they've ended up having many, many disasters. And I don't want to open up a new fight on a recent battle we had. It's just when I talked to the other governors, they had regrets about bringing trailers in because they ended up resulting in a lot of chaos and conflict. Also, Hawaii has historically had a total opposition to bringing trailers in. It's just been something we don't do. So that's a concern. Just so you know, also, we did game it out. We gamed out bringing in trailers and mobile homes. It was going to take several months. There were not going to be mobile homes and trailers here before Christmas. It just wasn't going to happen. And we got extensions anyway on most of the costs. So I think probably some of the discussion has been blown up a little bit about what we might have saved. I do want people moving out of hotels, but I want them moving into long-term rentals. If you ask, do I have thoughts about what we might have done in the short term? I might have been more aggressive on short-term rentals back in like October, November, when everyone was so stunned by the scope of the disaster. I think it would have been easier to convince everyone you can do a total halt or pause on short-term rentals then. But keep in mind, that's the peak season. People were already under contract. They would be facing thousands and thousands of dollars of fines. There would have been litigation. So at each idea, there were real, actual legal impediments to doing certain things. So it's better to be steady, have a housing plan that really builds houses, and then I think change our laws on short-term rentals and change some of our zoning rules so that we can build housing more quickly in Hawaii just for the good of local families. I still, acknowledge the need to have good water policy and good environmental protection, but you can see what's happened. We didn't build any housing for 20 plus years on Maui, and so when the disaster hit, you had options of either mobile homes, which people had qualms about, or B, hotels, or 3, trying to expedite transitional housing. So really we should be building more housing every year, and that's why that's our focus.
Mahalo. Our next question comes from Cammie with Civil Beat, and I'm going to read it because she's covering it remotely. Is it legal to let ERS payment lapse? Didn't legislature require it?
It is legal, actually. In fact, I think it's just a good idea because putting our people's needs in place now and taking care of them is just the way I would have approached it for the last 10 years, honestly. I always have felt that it's better to invest in people's wellness, drug treatment, housing, avoiding homelessness, rather than often kicking it down the road. And so we need these programs. What we will have to do, bless you, what we will have to do is send down either a request for an amendment on the floor, or I'm simply allowed to just lapse it after the session. It would just then revert the $300 million into the general fund, and the legislature would have the opportunity to appropriate that money next year. Either are okay. I'd prefer to lapse that money now so that they can fund the programs they think are most valuable. There are a lot of grants and aid, for example, with nonprofits that I really think are still needed, because though COVID has basically ended as a disease, we're not seeing many cases right now, not seeing many hospitalizations, we're still seeing the after effects of that in society. And I think that they should be funding programs to help people. I also believe that we're on a roll with homeless solutions. It's a pretty good investment because we're saving tens of thousands of dollars per person that gets into a kauhale per year. So there's good things that have to be done, and we're still working out the details. I did ask for the opinion of the House and Senate leadership, the House and Senate Finance and WEM committee chairs' opinions, and a lot of other people. And you're going to get, if you ask 10 people, you get about 12 ideas, which is healthy because they're thinking about it. But I just would rather invest this in our people now.
Our final question comes from Dan Nakaso with Honolulu Star Advertiser.
Thanks, Makana. Governor, I got a couple quick questions about illegal short-term rentals. You have the Ann Lopez looking into it.
Yes.
But doesn't the term illegal tell us it's already illegal? And what are you thinking in terms of penalties? Is it statewide, just Maui, just West Maui? If you can clarify.
Sure. So I've asked her to focus on West Maui right now because that's where our need is greatest, but this will apply statewide. The mayor's asked, actually, if we could help streamline our perception and definition of what is an actual illegal short-term rental so that they can also enforce more. I think that ultimately we're going to need more enforcement personnel. That's another good place to spend some resources because, as you know, the fines can be quite significant, but we can't find anybody, or it's very difficult to track down individuals from the mainland. I think if we set an example clearly and penalize people with those very large fines like they have in Honolulu, they'll start backing off. But if the idea is you're only going to get caught once out of every 2 or 3 or 500 times, people are rolling the dice because they're, as I shared in the last press conference, people are making about 400% of a regular rental rate when they have a short-term rental. So if they were getting $4,000 from a local family for a regular rental, their next-door neighbor that runs a short-term rental is getting $16,000 a month. And so they're rolling the dice. Over time, we want to incent people to sell back to the state of Hawaii. My personal belief is we should enact legislation that is a lot like what they did in New York State, which is you have to be on the premises or in the region. Therefore, you're a local family. We support local families to do short-term rentals if they're doing them legally, but we don't support mainland folks making a ton of money while our people are trying to find housing after a fire. So I promise not to swear today in the press conference, but I still am thinking it, okay? Because it's really rough to watch people make a lot of money while other families are still struggling to come out of hotels. I'm going to swear after the press conference about this.
Are you looking at increasing penalties and really trying to make people consider selling
Yes.
their properties?
I am.
So it's so onerous.
Yeah, so we gave one small overture this session because it happened kind of in real time, which was to give people tax exemptions if they transitioned out. In other words, amnesty is the way we described it. And we'll see. We'll see if that legislation passes. But tax amnesty is the carrot, and the stick would be that if you're violating the laws, ultimately you lose your property. I mean, that's the severest consequence. So let's see where we land. But I'll tell you that with 89,000 short-term rentals in our state and 75,000 of them being illegal, there's your housing solution. We bring those 75,000 units into the circulation of our population, then we can build in a normal fashion, and we can have a solution on our housing shortage. Expect us to be extremely firm next session with our proposals about transitioning to local ownership.
Actual final question, back to Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now.
Actually, just to clarify, at one point today you said that people who have lived in Lahaina and lost their homes and now their debris has been removed could get permits to rebuild perhaps before the end of the year. Is there a caveat there about if the infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewer, electricity is there? Because from what I've been hearing, that's really the time factor for people rebuilding. So, I mean, I don't want people to come away from this press conference thinking, we're going to have a permit for the end of the year when there might be these other factors. Are you sure those other factors will allow that?
That's exactly correct, right? So you're going to have water, sewer, and electricity. But, in parallel with all of these other programs, we've had HECO restoring electricity to the best of their ability right into the region. EPA work has gone on steadily, again, in tandem with the debris cleanup from the Army Corps of Engineers. So they've already been testing a lot of the water lines. A lot of the appropriations which we can get from FEMA are in the here and now on this infrastructure. So it's pretty amazing. I actually think when my team and I went through Maui on Monday, we were pretty blown away at how some of the progress has already been made and how clean many of the lots actually are. I think that especially around the edges of the fire, you're going to see the infrastructure start creeping in more quickly. And those individuals are going to be eager when there's no environmental health concern. They're going to be eager to put some, quick pop-up little house on so that they can build their old home. We're going to have to rebuild differently. That's still going to be the kuleana of the Maui community, especially Lahaina and the mayor. They have to decide what they want Lahaina to look like. It can't be the same because houses were too closely packed together and there wasn't a safe way to get out of the small streets. Also, we're going to have to come back off of Front Street a little bit because global warming does exist. Cue 6,000 haters who are watching from the mainland thinking that it doesn't. But it does exist, and so we're seeing sea level rise, and we have to be careful about that. So I think that a lot of people will get permits. What our position is the 561 families who were owner-occupiers, get them first, get them in an expedited way, and that we use the resources that we have from the legislature to put the infrastructure in. That's our position because the rentals, in many cases, were owned by people from the mainland. They have insurance. They're not in a desperate state. But as we solve for each one of the solutions we have in the local community for those 561 families, those are houses that don't need to be occupied in the transitional housing phase. Those can go to other people that were renters, that were seasonal workers. And that really helps us, solve the long-term problem. You noticed that there were 2,300 houses that were displaced. No one asked me the question, well, why are you only proposing 2,000? Because there's another, I'm hopeful that we rebuild at least the owner-occupiers' houses back in Lahaina. That gets us back over the number of units in the transition. And then, long-term, let Maui decide what it wants to build. Okay, so really in summary, an incredible amount of work is going on from HIEMA to the county to the feds. I will keep giving updates, more or less once a month. Expect these things to change by the week because we get updates. We get good news usually from the federal government. But be aware that the California communities that had their fires are still wrestling with some of these issues 5 years out. I spoke to the governor of New Mexico yesterday. She's 3 years out and still waiting for a lot of resources. We're trying to get all of the resources in place as fast as we can, and that's why we want this first year to be super dynamic. But no one should think that we are walking away from the rest of the state's challenges. We're going to keep charging in. Aloha.
Concludes today's press conference.